Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. My name is Nembo, and whether you're dealing with insomnia, stress, or just need some background noise to help you unwind for the night, you're in the right place. So grab your favorite drink, get comfortable, settle in, and let's dive into some stories. These ones are going to be wild. Our first story comes from someone who thought they understood what privacy meant until their neighbor discovered a very specific part of their online life. I've been living in this apartment complex for about 3 years now, and I've always been pretty careful about maintaining my own business. I keep to myself mostly. I pay my rent on time, I don't throw parties, I'm friendly in the hallway but not overly social. My neighbors are the type you nod to at the mailbox, and that's about it. Nothing deep, nothing complicated, just normal apartment living. About 2 years ago, I started an OnlyFans account, not for anything extreme or anything. I started posting fitness content, wellness tips, behind-the-scenes workout videos, that kind of thing. It was something I'd been thinking about for a while. I had a decent following on Instagram already from my personal training side gig, and OnlyFans seemed like a natural extension. The money was good. Better than good, honestly. I was making enough that I could cut back my hours at my regular job and focus on content creation. It was legitimate work, completely legal, totally within my rights to do, but it was also something I kept very private. I didn't tell most people in my life about it. My family didn't know. My coworkers didn't know. I used a different name online, different photos that obscured my face partially, or were taken at angles that didn't make me immediately recognizable. I was careful. I was cautious. I wasn't hiding because I was ashamed, but I was aware that people can be judgmental, and I didn't need that energy in my everyday life. My neighbor, let's call her Karen, because of course that's what this situation requires, has always been a little odd. She's probably in her mid-50s, has lived in the building for about 5 years, and has a tendency to involve herself in the business of everyone around her. She's the type who notices everything. If you get a delivery, she'll mention it. If your car isn't in its usual spot, she'll ask about it. She's not necessarily mean about it. It's more like a compulsive need to observe and comment. I'd noticed her staring at me a few times in the parking lot or the hallway, but I'd chalked it up to her just being nosy in that general way that some people are. Then, about 6 months ago, things shifted. I came home one day and found a note slipped under my door. It was printed, not handwritten, which somehow made it feel more formal and more threatening at the same time. The note said, "I know what you do online. We need to talk." That was it. No signature. Just that one sentence printed on a piece of standard white paper. My first instinct was confusion, then panic. I'd been so careful. I used a VPN when I accessed my account from home. I had a separate email address. I'd never posted anything from my apartment that would show my location. How would she know? And more importantly, why would she care enough to leave a note? I didn't respond to the note. I figured it was a prank or a misunderstanding. Maybe she'd confused me with someone else. Maybe she was just being weird in that way she always was. I told myself to ignore it and move on. But then there was a second note. 2 days later. This one was slightly more detailed. It said, "I've seen your account. We live in the same building. This affects all of us. I need to discuss this with you immediately. If you don't respond, I will have no choice but to contact the building management." Now I was genuinely alarmed. She had actually found my OnlyFans account. She knew it was me. And she was threatening to contact building management about my completely legal, completely private business. I went back and looked at my account settings. I'd been so careful, but I realized that if someone was determined enough, if they knew what to look for, they could potentially piece things together. Maybe she'd seen something. Maybe a photo where the background was slightly visible. Maybe someone had recognized me and mentioned it to her. Maybe she'd literally just scrolled through local OnlyFans creators until she found someone who looked like they might live in our area. The how didn't really matter at that point. The fact was she knew, and now she was escalating. I decided to confront her. I didn't want to, but I also didn't want to live with the uncertainty of her potentially going to building management and causing a whole situation. I knocked on her door on a Saturday morning, and she answered almost immediately, like she'd been expecting me. She was wearing a bathrobe and had coffee in her hand, and she had this expression on her face like she'd been waiting for this conversation for weeks. She invited me inside without me even asking. Her apartment was meticulously organized in a way that felt almost obsessive. Everything was categorized and labeled. Books on shelves arranged by color and genre. Magnets on the fridge organized by type. It was the kind of organization that speaks to a particular kind of mind. The kind of mind that notices things. The kind of mind that obsesses over details. She sat me down at her kitchen table and immediately started talking, before I could even say anything. She said she discovered my account completely by accident. She'd been browsing OnlyFans looking for fitness content, and my account had come up in the recommendations. At first she didn't realize it was me, but then she recognized something about the way I moved in one of the videos. The way I held myself during exercises. Something subtle that made her do a double take. So she started comparing the person in the videos to me, trying to figure out if it was actually me. And the more she looked, the more certain she became. But here's where it got weird. She said she wasn't angry about what I was doing. She said she actually respected that I was working hard and making money. What she was upset about, what she said, was affecting the entire building, was that I was doing this and nobody knew. She said that living in a building with someone who had this secret online presence without transparency was a violation of the community trust. She said that residents deserved to know who they were living around and what those people were doing. I tried to explain to her that my OnlyFans content was fitness and wellness related. It wasn't anything inappropriate. I was using my right to privacy just like everyone else used theirs. She didn't need to know about my job any more than I needed to know about hers. But she pushed back. She said it didn't matter what the content was. It was the principle of the thing. She said that if someone was living a double life, living this secret online persona while pretending to be someone normal in the hallway, that was inherently deceptive. She said she'd started to research me. She'd looked up my real name. She'd found my Instagram. She'd done a full social media deep dive to figure out who I really was. This was the moment I realized this wasn't about her being upset. This was about her feeling like she had the right to investigate me and expose me. This was about her feeling entitled to my information and my privacy because she'd become obsessed with uncovering my secret. I asked her directly why she'd left the notes, why she hadn't just approached me normally or minded her own business, why she decided that my private life was her concern. She said she'd left the notes because she wanted to give me an opportunity to come clean. She said she was trying to be fair. She was giving me a chance to explain myself before she went to building management. She was being gracious in her mind. She was offering me the opportunity to voluntarily disclose my online activity to the landlord and the building community before she had to do it for me. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I tried to explain to her that her entire approach was wrong, that she'd violated my privacy by investigating me, that she had no right to force me to disclose my job or my online presence to anyone. That threatening to go to building management was essentially blackmail, even if she didn't see it that way. But she was completely unmoved by this logic. She kept saying that she was just concerned about the community, that people deserved to know who they were living with. That transparency was important for building trust. What she really meant was that she wanted control. She wanted to know everyone's secrets. She wanted to feel like she had information that gave her some kind of power. I told her that I wasn't going to voluntarily disclose anything to anyone, and if she went to building management, I would have a serious problem with her. I said that what she was doing was invasive and inappropriate, and that she needed to stop investigating me and stop threatening me. She said that she hadn't made any threats. She'd simply stated what she would do if I didn't respond to her concerns. She said that if the building community knew what I was doing, they'd want to know. They'd want to have a say in whether it was appropriate for someone running an online business from their apartment. I left her apartment after that. I was shaking with a combination of anger and anxiety. I'd lived my entire life trying to keep my personal and professional worlds separate, and this woman had decided to tear down that wall without any regard for my privacy or my autonomy. The next day, I received a third note. This one stated that Karen was moving forward with her plan to contact building management about the situation. It said that she'd given me every opportunity to handle this myself, and now she was taking it to the appropriate channels. I called my landlord before she could. I explained the situation. I told him that one of the residents had discovered my OnlyFans account and was planning to report me for running an online business from the apartment. I wanted to get ahead of it. I wanted to explain that my online work was completely legal, that it posed no risk to the building, that it didn't violate any lease terms because it didn't generate excessive traffic or create any kind of disturbance. My landlord was actually pretty understanding. He said that he didn't have any problem with tenants running online businesses from their apartments as long as it didn't violate lease terms or disturb other residents. He said that what Karen was planning to do was overstepping, and that he'd have a conversation with her about appropriate building behavior. He did have a conversation with her, but it didn't stop her. Over the next 2 weeks, Karen started leaving notes under my door almost daily. The notes escalated from passive-aggressive concern about building community standards to outright accusations. She started saying that she'd looked into my account more deeply. She said that even though the content was technically fitness-related, the way it was presented and marketed was clearly designed to appeal to people with certain intentions. She said that my account was sexually suggestive in nature and that having this operating from the building was inappropriate. This wasn't true. My content was straightforward fitness content. But I realized that her perception didn't matter. What mattered was that she'd decided I was doing something wrong, and she was now working to prove it retroactively. I stopped reading the notes after a while. I threw them away without opening them. But I knew she was leaving them because I could see them piling up in my mailbox. Sometimes there'd be 3 or 4 in a single day. The situation escalated further when I started noticing that she was monitoring my comings and goings. I'd see her looking out her window when I left for work. I'd come home and find her standing in the hallway with some pretense about getting mail or checking the thermostat. But she was clearly waiting to see if I was arriving home alone or with someone. One day, I found a folder of printed screenshots from my OnlyFans account left on my car windshield. The images had been printed in color, and there were dozens of them. They were all of me. From various angles, various lighting situations, various states of workout attire, seeing them all printed out like that felt like a violation. It felt like she'd been collecting them, organizing them, cataloging me. There was a note attached to the folder with a paperclip. It said, "For your records, for your landlord, for anyone who needs proof of what's happening in this building." I took the folder inside and I called the police. I reported the situation as harassment and invasion of privacy. The police took a report, but they explained that technically, everything Karen was doing fell into a gray area. Leaving notes wasn't technically harassment if it wasn't threatening violence. Printing screenshots from a public account wasn't illegal. Following someone in common areas of the building wasn't stalking if it was technically her right to be in those common areas. But they did advise me to document everything. They told me to keep the notes, to take photos of my car and my door when I found things left there, to start a paper trail. So I did. I created a folder. I kept every note. I took photos of everything. I documented the dates and times when I saw her watching me. The situation continued for about 3 months before something changed. My landlord had a conversation with Karen about her behavior. He told her that her ongoing campaign against me was creating a hostile living environment and that it needed to stop. He explained that my online business was not a violation of any lease terms and that his tolerance for her involvement in my personal affairs had reached its limit. Karen pushed back. She said that she was just trying to protect the building's reputation. She said that she was concerned about the implications of having someone like me living here. But my landlord was firm. He said that if her behavior continued, he would issue her a formal warning about lease violation for creating a hostile environment, and further violations could result in eviction. That finally stopped the notes. That finally ended the daily surveillance. Karen essentially gave up her campaign, but she didn't disappear. She's still my neighbor. She's still in the building, and I still see her sometimes, looking at me with this expression that mixes disapproval with disappointment, like she failed in some mission she'd set for herself. The whole experience made me realize how tenuous privacy actually is, how easily someone determined enough can find information about you, how willing people are to insert themselves into situations that have nothing to do with them, how comfortable they can be with the idea that your personal life should be subject to their scrutiny and judgment. I still have my OnlyFans account. I still make content. But I'm more careful now. I've become hyper-aware of what might be visible in the background of photos. I've learned to think about angles and locations in ways I never did before. I've become more paranoid, if I'm being honest. Not because I'm doing anything wrong, but because I learned that privacy is something you have to actively defend. That story just ended there. And honestly, what Karen did is one of the most invasive, controlling things I've heard in a long time. The confidence it takes to decide that someone else's private business is your business. The audacity to investigate another person and then present yourself as the victim protecting the community. That's a specific kind of boundary violation that speaks to some deeper need to control and understand everything around you. It's not about protecting the building. It's about feeling powerful over someone else. Story 2. The confrontation, 9 minutes. Moving on to our next story, this one comes from someone who discovered that privacy violations can escalate in ways you never anticipate. I live in a suburban neighborhood, pretty typical American suburb. Tree-lined streets, families everywhere. The kind of place where people actually know each other. It's usually nice, But it also means that there's this underlying assumption that everyone's supposed to be normal in the same way, and anyone who deviates from that standard becomes subject to community interest and scrutiny. I've been living here for about 7 years with my spouse, and we've always kept to ourselves mostly. We're friendly at neighborhood gatherings. We wave at people. We contribute to the Neighborhood Watch Fund. We're good neighbors in all the ways that the neighborhood community seems to care about. But we don't broadcast our personal lives. We maintain boundaries. We believe in the concept of minding your own business. About a year ago, I started a Patreon and an OnlyFans account. The content was fitness and lifestyle oriented, similar to the previous story, but slightly more personalized. More behind-the-scenes content. More intimate in the sense that people who subscribed were getting access to things I didn't post publicly on Instagram or other platforms. It was a business decision. I had people who wanted more access to my life and my content, and this was a way to provide that while also generating income. My spouse knew about it. My spouse was supportive. We had conversations about boundaries and what I was comfortable sharing, and we set those boundaries together. I used editing and angles to maintain some privacy. I never filmed content in our home in ways that would reveal identifying details about our location. But I was still cautious because I knew that not everyone in the neighborhood would understand or approve. And I was right to be cautious, because somehow, someone found out. I was coming home from the gym one day, and my neighbor, let's call him Derek, was outside trimming his hedges. He called out to me before I could get to my door. He had this strange expression on his face, like he was nervous about something. He said he needed to talk to me about something, and that it might be uncomfortable, but he thought I'd want to know. My immediate instinct was that something was wrong, either with my house or with my family. But no. What he wanted to tell me was that he'd discovered my OnlyFans account. He'd been scrolling through one evening, and an account had come up, and he recognized me. He said he wasn't trying to spy on me or anything. He said it was completely accidental. But he felt like, as a neighbor and someone who cared about the community's well-being, he should mention it to me. I asked him why he thought my personal business was any of his concern. He said it wasn't about concern. It was just that he knew me, and he knew my spouse, and he felt like maybe they didn't know about the account, and he thought I should make sure that my family was aware of what was happening. This was a different flavor of boundary violation than what happened in the first story, but it was still a violation. It was still someone inserting themselves into my personal life with the justification that they were helping. I told him that my spouse was aware and supportive, and that my personal online activity was exactly that, personal. I thanked him for his concern but told him that I didn't need his input on how I conducted my life. He seemed surprised by my response. He said he was just trying to be helpful. He said he thought that in a close-knit neighborhood, people should be honest with each other about this kind of thing. I said that honesty and privacy aren't the same thing. I said that I could be perfectly honest with the people I actually cared about, while still maintaining the right to privacy from my neighbors. After that conversation, Derek went back to trimming his hedges and I went inside, but I had a bad feeling about it. I could tell that Derek felt like he'd been rejected for trying to do something good, and when people feel rejected for what they believe is a good deed, they sometimes double down. I was right. About a week later, I noticed Derek talking to another neighbor. They were standing in the street between our houses, and they were looking over at my house while they talked. I couldn't hear what they were saying, but I could see the dynamic. Derek was clearly explaining something, and the other neighbor, let's call her Michelle, was reacting with varying degrees of surprise and judgment. Over the next few days, I started noticing that more neighbors seemed aware of my account. People who'd never paid attention to me before suddenly had this strange energy when I saw them. They'd greet me differently. There was a knowing quality to it. Derek had told people. I found out later that he didn't just mention it casually to one person. He had essentially made it his mission to inform the neighborhood that one of their residents was running an OnlyFans account. He'd been going door to door, telling people. He'd created this narrative where he was the good neighbor trying to protect the community's standards by making sure everyone knew what was happening. The neighborhood social media group, which I'm part of, suddenly started getting posts about protecting community values and standards. Posts about how important it was that residents maintain certain appearances and behaviors. Posts about how the neighborhood's reputation was at stake. They were clearly directed at me and my situation, but they were phrased in vague language that allowed people to pretend they were talking about something else entirely. My spouse was furious. My spouse wanted to confront Derek directly. My spouse wanted to contact the HOA and file a formal complaint, but I knew that would make things worse. I knew that once you escalated something like this, it took on a life of its own. Instead, what I did was I made a post in the neighborhood group. It was measured and professional. I explained that a resident of the neighborhood had chosen to share private information about my personal life with other residents. I said that I was aware that not everyone would agree with my choices, but that my choices were legal and ethical, and that I valued my right to privacy. I said that I hoped the neighborhood community could respect that privacy, and that I wouldn't be responding to gossip or judgment about my personal business. And then I just let it sit. I didn't engage with the responses. I didn't argue with people. I just made my position clear, and then I disengaged. Most people actually had the good sense to not respond publicly. A few people sent me private messages of support, but the vast majority just kind of moved on with their lives, because it turned out that when you actually acknowledge something directly and refuse to engage with the drama, people have less to work with. They can't sustain a narrative if the person at the center of the narrative isn't playing along with being the victim or the villain. Derek still trims his hedges in my line of sight. We still occasionally see each other. There's an awkwardness there now that will probably never fully go away, but he stopped his campaign. He stopped trying to turn the neighborhood against me. He realized that his narrative of trying to help had fallen apart once I'd reframed it as boundary violation and gossip. The most interesting thing about this situation is that Derek probably still believes that what he did was right. He probably still tells himself that he was protecting the neighborhood. He probably still believes that his intention was pure and that I was the one being unreasonable. But the fact that his intention was good doesn't change the fact that his action was inappropriate, and that's something a lot of people never seem to understand. Good intentions don't grant you permission to violate someone else's privacy. That story ends right there. And what Derek did perfectly illustrates how easily privacy violations can become community campaigns. He found something about me that didn't fit the neighborhood narrative, and instead of minding his own business, he decided to use that information to restore what he saw as the proper order of things. The fact that he framed it as helping, as protecting, as looking out for community standards, is what made it so insidious. He was able to convince himself that he was the good guy the entire time. Story 3. The digital footprint. Our next story involves someone who learned the hard way that once something is online, the privacy invasion can come from multiple directions at once. I'm a teacher. I teach high school English, and I love my job. I care about my students. I care about the work. But I also have a life outside of school, and part of that life involves creating content online. I started an OnlyFans account about 2 years ago. The content was very similar to what other people in these stories have described. Fitness content. Lifestyle content. Nothing explicit. Nothing that would be inappropriate for someone to find out, but it was also content that was designed for adults and was posted on a platform that I assumed would be seen only by people who deliberately chose to follow me. What I didn't really think about was how discoverable everything is on the internet. I didn't think about the fact that my neighbor, or my coworker, or a student's parent, or literally anyone with internet access and the motivation to find me could potentially trace my identity through my OnlyFans account back to my real life. That's exactly what happened. I was called into my principal's office on a Tuesday morning. I could tell from the energy of the conversation that something was serious. My principal was uncomfortable. She kept clearing her throat and rearranging papers on her desk. She finally told me that she'd been contacted by a parent regarding my employment at the school. The parent, whose child was in my third period class, had discovered my OnlyFans account. The parent had found it through YouTube recommendation algorithm or TikTok or some kind of online trail that led to my profile. Once the parent found the account, they'd done what a lot of people do. They'd connected me back to my real identity. They'd Googled my username. They'd reverse searched my photos. They'd found my Instagram, which had my real name on it. They'd found my LinkedIn, which showed that I worked as a teacher. And once they'd put all of that together, they'd decided it was their responsibility to inform my employer. The parent's email to my principal was framed as a concern. They said they were uncomfortable with a teacher who maintained an explicit online presence being in positions of authority over their child. They said they questioned my judgment and my character. They said they were concerned about the impact this might have on the school's reputation if other parents found out. My principal explained to me that she didn't have a problem with what I did in my personal life. She said that my work as a teacher was excellent and that my personal online activity didn't impact my ability to do my job. But she also said that the school was going to have policies about this kind of thing, and that there would likely be some conversations with the school board. I tried to explain that my OnlyFans content wasn't explicitly anything. It wasn't any more explicit than what you'd see in a fitness magazine or on any social media platform. But the principal said it didn't matter. What mattered was that a parent felt uncomfortable, and what mattered was that the parent had decided to make it official. What followed over the next few weeks was a series of meetings and conversations. There were meetings with the principal. There were meetings with the school board. There were meetings with a lawyer I hired to protect my rights. And throughout all of these meetings, the same arguments kept coming up, the same concerns, the same judgment. The school eventually decided that while they had no legal grounds to fire me for my personal online activity, they were going to implement a new policy about teacher conduct on social media. The policy was vague enough that it could be used to justify firing me or anyone else who engaged in activities deemed inappropriate. The policy didn't mention OnlyFans specifically, but it was clearly a response to my situation. More than the school's response, though, what bothered me was the way other people handled the information. Other parents found out. Some were supportive, some were judgmental. Some wanted their kids transferred out of my class. Some questioned whether I should be teaching at all. The parent who'd reported me made a post in the neighborhood Facebook group about her concerns. She didn't name me, but she described the situation clearly enough that a lot of people could figure out who she was talking about. The post started a whole conversation about teacher conduct and character and whether online behavior should impact professional standing. One of my neighbors mentioned to me that they'd seen the post and had tried to defend me in the comments, but had gotten piled on by other people who felt like any online activity was inappropriate for a teacher. Another neighbor stopped saying hello when I passed them on the street. Someone keyed my car. Someone left a note on my door saying that I shouldn't be allowed around children. What started as one parent finding my account and reporting it to my school had metastasized into a full community situation. And even though technically, legally, I hadn't done anything wrong, I suddenly found myself in a position where I had to defend my entire character and my entire professional standing based on personal content that was completely legal and ethical. I ended my OnlyFans account about 6 months after all of this started, not because I'd done anything wrong, not because I believed the criticisms, but because the ongoing harassment and the threat to my job and my safety wasn't worth continuing with the account. I made a business decision that my mental health and my physical safety were worth more than the income I was generating. The whole situation is still affecting me. I'm more paranoid now. I think about every photo I post. I think about every interaction I have with parents and students. I think about what information I'm putting out into the internet and what could potentially be traced back to me. What bothered me most about this entire experience was that the parent who reported me was so certain that they were doing the right thing. They were so convinced that they were protecting their child and the community that they didn't stop to think about the impact of their actions. They didn't think about how violating it would be to have your private life weaponized against you. They didn't think about the fact that by doing the research required to connect my OnlyFans account to my real identity, they'd actually engaged in a deeper kind of invasion than what I'd done by posting the content in the first place. That story ends there. And what this parent did is what happens when someone decides that their values and their judgments should be enforced on everyone around them. They found something that didn't align with their worldview, and instead of just not engaging with that content, they decided to burn down someone else's career in an attempt to restore the order they believed should exist. The belief that you're doing the right thing is actually the most dangerous belief someone can have when they're about to hurt someone else. Story 4. The Organized Companion. Let's move into our next story, which takes the idea of privacy invasion and transforms it into something far more coordinated and deliberate. I've lived in my apartment building for about 4 years, and I've always been fairly social with my neighbors. We have building parties sometimes. We know each other's names. We help each other with packages and that kind of thing. It's a friendly building, or at least I thought it was. I started an OnlyFans account about a year ago, and like most people who do this, I tried to keep it completely separate from my real life and my real identity. I used a name that wasn't my name. I posted content that didn't show my face in ways that were immediately recognizable. I was very deliberate about maintaining that separation, but I also wasn't paranoid about it. I didn't think that any of my neighbors would ever find the account. I didn't think that anyone would care enough to investigate and connect the dots. Someone did. Someone cared enough. And that person apparently cared so much that they decided to involve other people. I found out what was happening when I received a message from a neighbor I barely knew. The message was sent through Facebook, and it said something like, "I don't know you very well, but I felt like you should know that there's been discussion in the building group chat about your OnlyFans account. A few residents have connected the dots, and there's talk about filing a complaint with the landlord." I was confused and horrified in equal measure. I immediately went looking for this group chat that apparently existed. I wasn't part of it. which meant it had been created specifically without me, and specifically to discuss me. I found out that one of the residents, let's call her Victoria, had apparently discovered my account and had then reached out to a few other residents she knew to let them know about it. They'd created a private group chat to discuss the situation. The group chat had apparently been going on for about a month before someone felt bad enough about the secrecy to message me. I read through the messages that had been shared with me. The tone was somewhere between concerned and judgmental. People were expressing worry about the building's reputation. People were questioning my character. People were suggesting that this kind of activity shouldn't be allowed in the building. There were suggestions about filing formal complaints with the landlord. There were jokes about it. There were people who seemed genuinely upset, and people who just seemed entertained by the drama. What struck me most was that these were people I'd been friendly with, people I'd hosted in my apartment, people I'd helped when they'd needed something, and they'd gone behind my back to create a group specifically to discuss my personal life and to coordinate a response to it. I contacted my landlord directly. I explained the situation. I said that residents in the building had discovered my OnlyFans account and had created a private group to discuss filing complaints about it. I said that the content was fitness-related and didn't violate any lease terms. I said that my personal online activity shouldn't be subject to complaint or judgment from other residents. My landlord was actually sympathetic. He said that as long as the content didn't violate lease terms and wasn't generating noise or disturbances, there was nothing he could do to prevent residents from running online businesses. But he also said that he'd talked to Victoria about the situation and about creating the group chat. What happened next was that instead of Victoria getting a warning or a conversation from the landlord, she knocked on my door one evening, and when I opened it, she was standing there with a folder full of printed content from my OnlyFans account. She had another resident with her, someone I knew slightly but wasn't particularly close with. The other resident was there as a witness, I think, or as support for Victoria. Victoria said that she wanted to talk to me about my account. She said that she and some other residents had concerns about the content I was posting and the impact it might have on the building community. She said that she understood that I had rights, but that the other residents also had rights to feel comfortable in their own homes. I tried to close the door. I told her that I didn't want to have this conversation, but she stuck her foot in the doorway. She said that I should at least let her present what they'd found. What they'd found, apparently, was evidence that my account was designed to appeal to a certain type of person, and that the content, while maybe not explicitly inappropriate, was clearly marketed in a way that implied a sexual component. They'd printed out screenshots of how my account was tagged and categorized on the platform. They had statistics about what percentage of OnlyFans creators in my category went on to post more explicit content. They had an actual folder of research they'd done about my account and my online presence. Victoria had apparently spent significant time and energy researching OnlyFans as a platform, researching my specific account, researching how accounts like mine were categorized and marketed, and building what she saw as a case against me. I told her that her research didn't change the fact that the content I posted was fitness-related, and that my personal online activity was not their concern. I told her to take the folder and leave my apartment. I told her that if they wanted to file a formal complaint with the landlord or with the building, they could do that. But I wasn't going to stand in my doorway and be lectured about my personal life choices by neighbors who'd appointed themselves as my moral police. She left, but the situation didn't stop there. The complaints went to the landlord. The landlord had to formally review them. There were more conversations. There were more meetings. The building manager had to issue a formal statement saying that as long as the content didn't violate lease terms, residents had the right to run online businesses from their apartments. But the damage was done. The atmosphere in the building had changed. People who'd been friendly were now uncomfortable around me. The building party stopped. The building community, which had seemed so nice and cohesive, had fractured along the lines of who knew about my account and how they felt about it. About 6 months later, Victoria moved out of the building. Someone told me that she'd found a new place that was more aligned with her values. I have no idea what that actually means, but the implication was that she'd found a building where people were more similar to her and shared her standards and her beliefs. After she left, things got better. People seemed more willing to go back to normal interactions. The other residents who'd been in the group chat seemed embarrassed about the whole thing, at least enough that they stopped actively discussing it or trying to organize formal complaints. But there's still this knowledge that they did this. There's still this understanding that they felt they had the right to investigate me, to research me, to organize against me, all without my knowledge or input. And that changed how I see them, and how I see community in general. The whole situation was coordinated privacy invasion. It was deliberate. It was organized. It was people pooling their resources and their judgment to try to control someone else's behavior that didn't actually affect them in any meaningful way. That story ends right there. And what Victoria and her group did was create a moral surveillance infrastructure around one person. They appointed themselves as judges and enforcers of community standards. They spent time and energy researching someone else's legal personal activity and then trying to build a case against them. They involved other people in their judgment. They created an us versus them dynamic in a community that was supposed to be neutral territory, where people were just trying to live their lives. That's what organized campaigns of privacy violation look like. That's what it looks like when judgment becomes, activism becomes enforcement. Story 5. The workplace escalation. 9 minutes. Our next story comes from someone who experienced a privacy violation that crossed from their personal life directly into their workplace. I work in tech. Mid-sized company, about 150 people, mostly remote but with an office in the city. I've been working there for about 3 years, and I like my job. I like my team. I like the work. I've always maintained professional boundaries at work. I keep my personal life separate. I don't overshare. I'm friendly but not friends with everyone. About 2 years ago, I started creating OnlyFans content. It was fitness content, nutrition content, lifestyle content. The usual thing. I was very careful not to post anything that would tie it directly to my work or to my identity as my work identity. I used a different name. I was careful about backgrounds. I didn't mention my work. I created a whole separate online presence. One of my coworkers, let's call him Nathan, apparently came across my account at some point. I don't know how. He claimed it was accidental, an algorithm recommendation or something. But I've learned that there are no real accidents on the internet. People find what they're looking for when they're motivated enough to look for it. Nathan didn't say anything to me directly. He didn't come to me with what he'd found. What he did instead was, he started approaching me in the office in strange ways. He'd reference things that had happened on my OnlyFans account in ways that were subtle enough that nobody else would notice, but obvious enough that I would know that he knew. He'd make comments about my fitness routine that included details I'd only shared on my OnlyFans account. He'd reference specific videos or specific content. He'd bring them up in ways that felt like a threat or like blackmail. He wasn't being overtly aggressive about it, but there was a clear dynamic where he was letting me know that he had information on me and that he could use that information if he wanted to. I tried to ignore it at first. I tried to just let it slide and hope that he'd lose interest. But he kept doing it. Every few days, he'd find some way to reference something from my account in a way that only I would understand. Finally, I directly asked him to stop. I approached him in a private moment, and I said that I knew he'd found my OnlyFans account and that I needed him to stop making references to it at work. I said that my personal online activity was exactly that, personal, and that I didn't appreciate him bringing it into our workplace. Nathan responded by acting like he had no idea what I was talking about. He said he didn't know what OnlyFans was. He said I must be confused about what he'd been saying. He played innocent in a way that made it very clear that he wasn't innocent at all. He was just showing me that he could be, if he wanted to use what he knew against me. I went to HR. I filed a formal complaint about Nathan's behavior. I explained that a coworker had discovered my personal OnlyFans account and was making veiled references to it in the workplace, in ways that felt like harassment and potentially blackmail. The HR representative I spoke to seemed uncomfortable. She said that they would take the complaint seriously, but she also asked me to provide specific examples of what Nathan had said. I gave her examples, but they were all subtle enough that without context, they didn't sound like much. They sounded like a coworker making normal comments about fitness, or work, or whatever, with no actual reference to OnlyFans. HR did talk to Nathan. They spoke to him about workplace conduct and harassment, but because the comments were deniable, because Nathan could claim that I'd misunderstood, there was no formal action they could take. What happened after that was worse. Nathan apparently decided that I'd tried to get him in trouble with HR, and he started moving into a different phase of whatever this was. He started telling other people at work about my account. He'd mention it casually in conversations. He'd say things like, "Oh, I found out what does in her free time," and people would ask what he meant, and he'd say something vague but enough to make people curious. He was spreading the information deliberately, he was telling people. He was making sure that the knowledge was distributed throughout the office. People started treating me differently. Some people were supportive. Some people were judgmental. Some people seemed entertained by the scandal of it. Some people seemed uncomfortable around me. The knowledge that I had an OnlyFans account became office gossip. It became the thing that defined me in the workplace, at least for a certain number of people. I complained to HR again. I said that the situation had escalated and that Nathan was now actively spreading information about my personal account throughout the office. I said that this was harassment and that it was creating a hostile work environment. HR did more investigation this time. They interviewed several people. They tried to figure out the scope of the knowledge and the scope of the harassment. But again, because everything Nathan had done was deniable, because he could say he was just having conversations and that he was surprised people were interested in what he'd mentioned, it was difficult to take formal action. The company did eventually move Nathan to a different department, ostensibly for organizational reasons, but really because HR wanted to create distance between us. But the damage was done. The knowledge was already out there. The dynamic in my workplace had already changed. I started looking for a new job about 4 months after the situation escalated. Not because I'd done anything wrong, but because I knew that no matter what happened with Nathan, I was going to be defined by this one thing for the rest of my time at that company. I was going to be the person with the OnlyFans account. I was going to be the person that people gossiped about. I was going to be uncomfortable in spaces that used to feel normal and safe. I found a new job at a different company. I didn't tell anyone at my old job about my OnlyFans account going forward. I ended the account before I started the new job, just to be safe. I didn't want the situation to follow me into a new workplace. What Nathan did was use information he had about me as leverage. He was letting me know that he could hurt me if he wanted to. He was demonstrating his power, and when I tried to use institutional protections against him, he just pivoted to a different strategy that was less directly confrontable but more damaging in its scope. That story ends right there. And what makes Nathan's behavior so insidious is that he was able to hurt me without technically doing anything that was formally actionable. He could say things that weren't quite threats. He could spread information in ways that seemed like gossip rather than harassment. He could weaponize information in a way that avoided the formal rules of the workplace, while still creating very real harm. Story 6. The Family Discovery. 8 minutes. Moving on to our next tale. This one comes from someone who had the privacy violation hit closest to home. I live with my parents. I'm 26 years old, and I know that's older than a lot of people live at home, but it's not unusual where I'm from. My parents have a big house. I have my own space. We're all adults. We coexist. It works out fine for financial reasons and for family reasons. I started an OnlyFans account about a year ago. The content was fitness-related, lifestyle-related, very similar to what a lot of people in these stories have described. I posted content. I made money. I kept it separate from my real identity as much as possible. But I live with my parents. That created a unique kind of vulnerability that I didn't think about. My mom found my account. I don't know exactly how. She's not particularly tech-savvy, so it would have been someone who showed her, or it would have been some kind of accidental discovery that she had the bad luck to encounter. But she found it. Instead of talking to me about it directly, which would have been the adult way to handle it, she mentioned it to my dad, and then my parents had a conversation about it without me. When they finally told me they knew, we were all sitting at the dinner table. My mom was clearly upset. My dad was trying to be reasonable, but was obviously uncomfortable. My mom said that she'd seen my account and that she was shocked and disappointed by what I was doing. I tried to explain that the content was completely appropriate, that it was fitness content, that I was being safe about not revealing my identity, that it was a legitimate way to make money, and that there was nothing wrong with what I was doing. My mom said that it didn't matter what the content was. What mattered was that I was putting myself out there in a way that made me vulnerable. What mattered was that I was creating a public persona that could be found and tracked and used against me. What mattered was that I was engaging in behavior that reflected poorly on the family. This is when things got weird. My parents decided that they needed to have a say in what I did with my body and my image online. They said that I was living under their roof, and that meant I needed to follow their rules about what was appropriate. I'm an adult. I have a job. I pay rent. I pay for my own food. The fact that I live in their house doesn't mean I've forfeited my right to autonomy over my own body and my own online presence. But my parents didn't see it that way. My mom was deeply upset. My dad was frustrated. They had conversations with each other about whether I should be living at home if I was going to engage in this kind of activity. They questioned whether they should feel uncomfortable having people visit their home when I was living there with an OnlyFans account. I tried to explain the concept of privacy and separation of roles and autonomy, but my parents were stuck on the idea that my actions reflected on them. That if I had an OnlyFans account, people would wonder what kind of family we were. People would judge them for having a daughter who did this. It became a family situation. It became a point of conflict. Every conversation was tense. Every interaction was charged with this underlying resentment and disappointment and judgment. My parents started checking in on my online activity. They wanted to know if I was still posting. They wanted to know how many subscribers I had. They wanted to know if I was making money. They wanted to know all of these details because they were trying to figure out how to convince me to stop. They asked other family members to talk to me about it. My aunt called me to express her concern. My grandmother called me to tell me that I was bringing shame on the family. My uncle tried to approach it from a financial angle and suggested that there must be better ways to make money. Suddenly, the fact that I had an OnlyFans account wasn't just my personal business anymore. It had become a family matter that everyone felt entitled to have opinions about. I felt like I lost my privacy and my autonomy in my own home. I felt like my family had violated my trust. I felt like the boundary between my personal life and my family life had been erased. After about 3 months of this, I moved out. I found an apartment with a roommate, and I got my own place. It took a lot of financial pressure off my parents, which I think made them feel guilty, but it was something I had to do to reclaim my autonomy. My relationship with my parents is different now. We still talk. We still see each other. But there's this layer of distrust that didn't exist before. There's this feeling that they've demonstrated that they don't respect my privacy or my autonomy, that they feel entitled to judge me and to involve other family members in their judgment. I ended my OnlyFans account about 6 months after I moved out. Not because my parents were right, not because I believed that there was anything wrong with what I was doing, but because the stress of having my family so upset and so involved in something that was supposed to be separate and private was just too much to handle. What my parents did was demonstrate that privacy and autonomy were conditional in my family. They showed me that they believed that my body and my image and my choices were subject to their judgment and their approval. They showed me that loyalty to the family meant conforming to their standards, even when those standards were applied unevenly and unfairly. That story ends right there. And what's particularly tragic about this situation is that it was the people who loved me most that violated my privacy and autonomy. It wasn't a stranger. It wasn't a stranger who discovered my account and used it against me. It was my parents. And that betrayal is in some ways deeper than any other privacy violation because it's wrapped up in love and family obligation and the expectation that family would support you. Story 7. The content reposting. Our next story involves a privacy violation that moved into a completely different arena. I had an OnlyFans account for about 8 months before I discovered that my content was being reposted and redistributed without my consent on other platforms. The account was fitness and lifestyle content. The content was created by me, posted by me, and the subscription was paid to me directly. But I discovered that entire compilations of my content were being posted to free porn sites and content aggregators and subreddits designed for that purpose. When I realized what was happening, I felt violated in a way I hadn't felt violated before. This wasn't someone invading my privacy for personal reasons. This was someone, or multiple someones, taking the work I'd created and the content I'd posted on a platform where people paid to see it, and redistributing it for free, often in contexts that implied the content was more sexually explicit than it actually was. I started trying to report the content. I'd find a video of mine reposted on some free site, and I'd file a copyright claim, and sometimes it would be taken down. But more often than not, the site would ignore my claim, or it would take too long to process, or the content had already been copied to 50 other sites. It became a full-time job trying to protect my content. I'd spend hours every day searching for my videos on these sites and trying to get them taken down. I'd find the same video reposted 15 times on 15 different platforms. I'd find compilations of my content. I'd find my content being sold in packages by third parties who had no right to sell it. It was happening at such a scale that I started to feel like I'd lost control of my own image and my own work. I started to feel like once I'd posted something on the internet, it was no longer mine. It was public property. It was available for anyone to use in any way they wanted. The stress of trying to protect my content while also continuing to create content became overwhelming. I had to hire a lawyer to help with copyright claims. I had to spend money on takedown services designed specifically to search the internet for stolen content and issue removal notices. I had to document everything and build a case and prove that the content was originally mine. But even with all of that effort, I couldn't stop it. For every piece of content I got taken down from one site, it would appear on 3 more sites that same day. It was like fighting a hydra. You remove one instance and 3 more grow back. Eventually, I just ended the account. I stopped creating content because the content creation became less about making money and more about fighting constant battles to protect the content I'd already created. What the reposting did was demonstrate the massive vulnerability of putting anything on the internet. What it demonstrated was that once you create something and post it somewhere, you lose ownership of it. You can file copyright claims, you can pursue legal action, but at a certain scale, it's impossible to protect. And the people reposting the content weren't doing it out of privacy invasion in the way that the other stories describe. They were doing it because free porn sites make money from traffic, and stolen content is always cheaper and easier to get than creating original content. They were profiting off my work without my consent. That story ends right there. And what makes this kind of privacy violation unique is that it's not personal. Nobody is investigating you or trying to hurt you personally. They're just engaging in a system that treats content as something that exists to be exploited. But the result is the same as a personal privacy violation. You lose control of your own image. You lose control of your own work. You lose the ability to determine how your content is used and who profits from it. Story 8, the police report. 8 minutes. Let's move into our next story, which takes privacy invasion to a place where legal intervention becomes necessary. I had an OnlyFans account for about 1.5 years when I discovered that one of my regular subscribers, someone who I thought was just a regular customer, was actually someone who lived in my neighborhood. I found this out because of an accident. I was out for a run one morning, and I ran past someone's house where I noticed photos of me. Photos that I'd only posted on my OnlyFans account, printed and posted in a window that faced the street. I stopped running. I stood there on the sidewalk staring at these photos of myself, confused and horrified. These were intimate photos. They were fitness photos, but they were still intimate in the sense that they were content that was created for subscribers on a paid platform. The man who lived in that house, let's call him Marcus, had apparently printed my photos and put them in his window. And when I say in his window, I mean like multiple photos, collaged together, arranged in a specific way that suggested this was deliberate. I didn't knock on his door. I didn't confront him. I immediately went home and called the police and filed a report for harassment and for illegal posting of images. The police came out and took photos of the situation. They confirmed that it was a violation. They confirmed that posting someone else's copyrighted images in a public window without permission was harassment. They confirmed that the situation was concerning. They went to Marcus's house and asked him to remove the photos. He said that he was a fan of mine and that he was just expressing his appreciation. He said that the photos were already public because they were on the internet. He said that he didn't understand how printing them and posting them in his own house was a violation of my rights. The police explained that regardless of his understanding or his intention, the behavior was inappropriate and needed to stop. Marcus removed the photos from the window. The police filed a report. But they explained to me that there wasn't much more they could do without evidence that he was engaging in ongoing harassment or that he was a direct threat. I was nervous after that. I knew that Marcus lived in my neighborhood. I knew that he was familiar with me. I knew that he had access to my photos and my content. I knew that he had demonstrated that he was willing to violate my privacy and my consent to display those photos in a public way. I started being more careful. I changed my running route. I was more aware of my surroundings. I looked over my shoulder more. I felt unsafe in my own neighborhood. About a week later, I got a package delivered to my house. It was from Marcus. It contained printed photos from my OnlyFans account and a letter. The letter said that he understood the photos in the window had upset me, but that he wanted me to know that he was a big fan and that he appreciated the content I created. I immediately called the police again. I reported that Marcus had sent me a package containing printed copies of my photos without my permission. I reported that he seemed to be targeting me and that I felt unsafe. The police took this more seriously. They went back to Marcus's house. They told him that sending unsolicited photos to someone was harassment and that he needed to stop all contact with me immediately. Marcus apparently argued with the police. He said that he wasn't trying to harass me. He was just trying to express his appreciation. He said that I was overreacting. He said that sending fan mail was normal and that he didn't understand how it was any different from sending a letter to any other public figure. The police explained that the difference was that I wasn't a public figure. He knew where I lived, And he was sending unsolicited packages containing images without my permission after having already been confronted once about printing my images without permission. This constituted a pattern of behavior that added up to harassment. The police eventually issued Marcus a formal warning. They told him that if he continued to contact me or send me anything, he would be charged with harassment. They told him that he needed to stop following my content, and he needed to stop treating me as anything other than someone who had made it clear she did not want contact with him. I did end my OnlyFans account after that. Not immediately, but within a few months. The situation with Marcus made me realize that there were people who viewed my content as something that created a relationship between us, that my content consumption created, in their minds, a connection that I didn't consent to and didn't want. That I couldn't control how people interpreted what I posted or what kind of relationship they decided they had with me. What Marcus did was blur the line between being a customer and being a stalker. He took his subscriber status and used it as justification for violating my privacy in increasingly aggressive ways. He printed my photos without permission. He posted them in a public place. He sent them to my home address. He framed all of this as appreciation and as fandom rather than as harassment and violation. That story ends right there. And what makes Marcus's behavior so disturbing is that he probably did believe that he was doing something nice. He probably did believe that he was expressing genuine appreciation. But his appreciation came at the cost of my safety and my consent. His desire to connect with me overrode any consideration for what I actually wanted or what I actually consented to. And that's the really dangerous part of privacy violation. It's when someone decides that their feelings or their wants are more important than someone else's clearly stated boundaries. Story 9B: Extortion Attempt. 9 minutes. Our next story involves a privacy violation that escalated into something criminal. I had an OnlyFans account for about 2 years when I received a message from someone claiming to have downloaded all of my content and threatening to distribute it to my family and friends if I didn't pay them money. This is apparently a common scam. Someone watches your OnlyFans content. They download videos or screenshots. They do some basic internet research and figure out who you are in real life. They find your social media where you're connected to family and friends. And then they send you a message saying that if you don't send them money, they'll distribute your OnlyFans content to all those people. When I got the message, I panicked. I immediately told the person that I didn't have money to send them. I told them that threatening to distribute my content was illegal and that I was going to report them to the police. The person responded by saying that they weren't threatening anything. They were just letting me know what would happen if I didn't cooperate. They said that it would be a shame if my grandmother saw the kind of content I posted online. They said that it would be unfortunate if my employer was made aware of my OnlyFans account. They said that these things could be prevented if I just sent them $2,000. I reported it to the police. I reported it to OnlyFans. I reported it to the FBI's Internet Crime Complaint Center. And then I waited to see what would happen. The person didn't distribute my content. They actually disappeared after I reported them. Apparently, what happens in a lot of these situations is that the person making the threats is counting on the victim being scared enough to pay without reporting it. Once they realize that the person has reported them to authorities, they move on to another target who might be more compliant. But the whole experience left me terrified. For a while, I was waiting for my content to show up in my family's inbox. I was waiting for my employer to say something. I was living with this ongoing anxiety that the threat was going to be carried out, even though the person had apparently moved on. The fact that someone thought they could do this to me, the fact that someone thought they could profit off my fear and off my image and off the violation of my privacy, that was really disturbing. I ended my OnlyFans account about 3 months later. I didn't end it because the extortion attempt was successful. I ended it because I realized that my OnlyFans account was a vulnerability that people could exploit. I realized that by creating content and posting it online, I was creating a version of myself that could be weaponized against me. I realized that the money I was making wasn't worth the risk. What the extortion attempt demonstrated was the scale at which privacy violations can occur. It wasn't a neighbor or a coworker or a family member invading my privacy because they disapproved of my choices. It was a stranger, someone who I had never met, someone who had no personal stake in my life, someone who was motivated purely by profit, targeting me because they saw an opportunity. That story ends right there. And what makes extortion so powerful as a privacy violation is that it uses something you've already consented to share with some people, OnlyFans subscribers, and uses that as leverage to coerce you into doing something you don't want to do. It's not about the content itself. It's about using your assumed fear of people finding out about the content as a weapon. Story 10. The policy change. Moving on to our next tale. This one comes from someone who discovered that employers and platforms were starting to take privacy violation more seriously. I have an OnlyFans account and I work in corporate HR. I know that sounds like a contradiction, but I keep them very separate, and my employer has nothing to do with my personal life. About a year ago, my company started developing a social media policy. It was framed as being about protecting employee privacy and protecting the company's reputation. But what it really was about was establishing clear rules about what employees could do online and what the company's obligations were if they found out about it. The policy basically said that if an employee's personal online activity came to the company's attention and the company believed it reflected poorly on the company or violated community standards, the company had the right to take action. The policy wasn't specific about what OnlyFans was, but it was clear that the policy was designed to give the company the right to regulate employee behavior outside of work hours and outside of the workplace. I was the one who had to implement and explain this policy to employees. I had to sit through multiple meetings where I explained to people that the company was technically allowed to take action if they found out about certain personal online activities. The whole thing was deeply uncomfortable for me, because I knew that if my company found out about my OnlyFans account, the policy I just helped implement could be used against me. I raised concerns about the policy. I said that it seemed like it was giving the company too much power over employee privacy. I said that I was worried about the ethical implications of a company trying to regulate employee behavior that didn't happen at work and didn't interfere with work. But the company pushed forward with the policy anyway. The company said that they had the right to protect their reputation and the right to maintain certain standards in the workplace. It was a weird position to be in. I was implementing a policy that could theoretically be used against me. And I was one of the few people in the room who understood just how vulnerable that made all of us. What the policy change represented was a broader trend. Companies were starting to claim the right to regulate employee personal lives and personal online activities. They were starting to say that if they found out about something, they had the right to take action based on their own internal standards about what was appropriate. I eventually left that company. Not directly because of the policy, but partly because of it. I didn't feel comfortable implementing policies that violated employee privacy. I didn't feel comfortable being in a position where I was the person who had to explain to employees that the company had the right to regulate their personal lives. That story ends right there. And what the policy change represented was a shift in how companies were thinking about employee privacy and employee regulation. It was a demonstration of the fact that privacy violations were becoming institutionalized. They were becoming policies. They were becoming official. They were becoming enforceable. And that's a different kind of privacy invasion than what we've seen in the other stories, but it's equally important because it sets the tone for how much privacy people are actually allowed to have. Story 11. The apology that changed nothing. Our next story involves someone who got an apology that didn't actually repair any of the damage that had been done. I lived in a neighborhood where a woman, let's call her Patricia, had discovered my OnlyFans account and had done everything I've described in these stories. The notes, the research, the group chat, the attempts to involve other residents and building management. She'd escalated every step of the way. She'd printed my content. She'd organized against me. She'd threatened to involve building management and the HOA and everyone else she could think of. And then, about 6 months after I moved out of the apartment building to escape the situation, I got a letter in the mail from Patricia. It was handwritten. It was long. It was an apology. Patricia wrote that she'd had time to think about her behavior, and she'd realized that she'd overstepped. She wrote that she understood that my personal online activity was my business. She wrote that she regretted the way she'd handled the situation. She wrote that she hoped I could forgive her and that she hoped we could move past this. She didn't explain what had caused her to change her mind. She didn't explain why she'd decided to apologize now, months after the fact. She just said that she'd reflected and she was sorry. I appreciated the apology in theory. I was glad that she'd realized that her behavior had been wrong, but the apology didn't change any of the damage. The apology didn't undo the months of harassment. The apology didn't give me back the sense of safety I'd lost. The apology didn't repair my relationship with the other neighbors. The apology didn't make it so that I could move back into the apartment building without feeling anxious. What the apology did was it made Patricia feel better. It gave her the chance to position herself as someone who had realized their mistake and corrected course. It gave her a way to feel absolved of what she'd done. But for me, it was too little and too late. The damage was done. My life had already changed. I'd already moved. I'd already ended my OnlyFans account. I'd already lost the income. I'd already invested weeks in getting past the trauma of being targeted like that. I sent Patricia a brief response. I thanked her for the apology, but I said that it didn't change what had happened or the impact that it had had on my life. I said that I accepted her apology intellectually, but that it didn't repair the violation I'd experienced. I haven't heard from her since then. But the apology sits with me as an example of how people who commit privacy violations often think that once they realize they've done something wrong, they can just apologize and that makes it okay. They think that the apology fixes the violation, but it doesn't. It just gives them a way to feel less guilty. That story ends right there. And what Patricia's apology demonstrated was that violating someone's privacy and then apologizing for it doesn't undo the violation. It doesn't repair the trust. It doesn't give the person their sense of safety back. It just shifts the emotional labor from the person who committed the violation onto the person who was violated, because now the violated person has to decide whether to accept the apology or carry the bitterness. Either way, the person who committed the violation gets relief, and the person who was violated is left dealing with the consequences. Story 12. The rebranding attempt. 8 minutes. Let's move into our next story, which involves someone who tried to reclaim their privacy by rebranding completely. I had an OnlyFans account for about 3 years, and I'd built up a pretty significant following. Thousands of subscribers, consistent income, a community around my content. But the privacy violations kept happening. Different people finding my account, different people invading my privacy in different ways, different people using the knowledge of my OnlyFans account against me. At a certain point, I realized that I couldn't control who found my account. I couldn't control how people used the knowledge of my account once they found it. I couldn't protect myself from every privacy invasion that might occur. So I decided to rebrand. I decided to completely change my OnlyFans identity. I deleted my old account. I created a new account with a completely different name. I changed my approach to my content. I was going to start completely fresh and try to build a new following without any of the baggage from my old account. What I didn't realize was that once you've posted something on the internet, you can never fully delete it. There are archive sites. There are people who've downloaded and saved your content. There are screenshots. There are backups. Once your content is out there, it's out there forever. So even though I deleted my account and started fresh, people who knew about my old account could still find the content. They could find it on archive sites. They could find it on YouTube. They could find it on Reddit or Twitter or any number of places where people had reposted it. And when I started my new account, I discovered that people had already found out it was me. They'd connected the dots. They'd figured out that it was the same person with a new identity. And they started referencing my old content in my new community. They started bringing up old drama that I was trying to move past. The rebranding didn't work. You can't actually rebrand completely on the internet. You carry your past with you. Your content follows you. Your mistakes or the violations that have happened to you follow you. You can try to leave your old identity behind, but the internet doesn't forget, and people who know are always going to be there to remind you. Eventually, I ended the OnlyFans account completely. Not a rebrand. Not a pivot. I just stopped. I decided that the income wasn't worth the ongoing privacy violations and the impossibility of actually controlling my identity or my image on the internet. That story ends right there. And what the rebranding attempt demonstrated was the futility of trying to escape the internet. Once you've put something out there, once you've created an identity, once you've been connected to content, you can't actually fully move on. You carry it with you. And people who want to find you will find you. People who want to remind you of your past will remind you. Story 13. The Unexpected Alley. Our next story involves a privacy violation where someone unexpected became an advocate. I had an OnlyFans account and a coworker found out about it. Let's call this coworker David. I was sure that David was going to do what so many people had done before, spread the information around the office, create drama, use the knowledge against me in some way. But David surprised me. When he discovered my account, he came to me privately. He told me that he'd found it, that he knew it was me, and that he wanted to give me a heads up before anyone else at work found out. David said that he thought the information would become a problem if the wrong people found out about it, and that I should probably be prepared for that possibility. But he also said that he thought what I was doing was legitimate and that he didn't have any judgment about it. I was shocked. I was prepared for him to be a problem, and instead, he was being an ally. What made David different was that he seemed to understand that other people's personal choices about their bodies and their work were just that, personal choices. He seemed to understand that my OnlyFans account was no different than if I was doing freelance photography or graphic design or any other online work. He seemed to understand that there was nothing inherently scandalous or problematic about the situation. David never told anyone at work about my account. He never used the information against me. He never made me uncomfortable about it. He just knew, and he was cool about it. Eventually, someone else at work did find out about my account. And when that person started trying to create drama about it, David was one of the people who pushed back. He said that what I did in my personal time was my business. He said that having an OnlyFans account didn't make me a bad employee or a bad person. He said that it was nobody else's business. Having David as an unexpected ally made a huge difference in how that situation played out. Instead of the whole office fracturing along the lines of whether my OnlyFans account was appropriate, most people just kind of moved on with their lives. And that was partly because David had established that he didn't think it was a big deal. I kept my OnlyFans account because I had at least one person at work who wasn't going to judge me for it. I kept it because I realized that not everyone reacts to this information with invasion and judgment. Some people are able to mind their own business. Some people are able to respect boundaries. Some people are able to accept that other people make different choices than they would. That story ends right there. And what David's response demonstrated was that privacy violations aren't inevitable when someone finds out personal information about you. They're only inevitable if the person who finds out decides that they have the right to act on that information. David chose not to. David chose to be an ally instead. And that made all the difference. Story 14. The Legal Victory. 8 minutes. Moving on to our next tale. This one comes from someone who actually won a legal case against someone who'd violated their privacy. I had an OnlyFans account, and a neighbor discovered it. The neighbor, let's call him Thomas, wasn't satisfied with just knowing about it or telling other people about it. Thomas decided that he wanted access to the content without paying for it. He decided that he wanted to hack into my account. Thomas managed to get my password. He claimed later that he'd done it by social engineering, by calling OnlyFans customer support and convincing them to reset my account. But regardless of how he did it, he got into my account. Once he was in my account, he downloaded all of my content. He accessed subscriber information. He accessed my payment information. He essentially completely violated the security of my account. I discovered what had happened when I noticed unusual activity on my account. I noticed that my password had been changed. I noticed that there was a login from an IP address that wasn't mine. I immediately locked down the account and contacted OnlyFans and contacted the police. With help from OnlyFans' security team, I was able to identify that Thomas had been the one who'd accessed my account. We traced his IP address. We found evidence that he'd downloaded my content and was redistributing it for free on various adult websites and subreddits. I pressed charges against Thomas for hacking and for copyright infringement and for harassment. Thomas fought the charges. He said that he'd only done it because he was concerned about my safety and wanted to make sure my account was secure. He said that accessing my account was about protecting me. The judge was not convinced. The judge ruled that Thomas had committed multiple crimes and that his stated motivation, concern for my safety, was not a legitimate reason for hacking into someone's account and stealing their content. Thomas was convicted. He was sentenced to community service and probation. He had to pay restitution for the stolen content. He was ordered to cease all contact with me and to stop distributing my content. For the first time in a long series of privacy violations, there were actual legal consequences for the person who'd violated my privacy. For the first time, the legal system actually protected me, instead of just offering sympathy but no real action. Winning the case gave me some sense of justice. It gave me some sense that what Thomas had done was recognized as wrong and criminal. But it also didn't undo the fact that he'd accessed my account. It didn't undo the fact that he'd downloaded and distributed my content. It didn't give me back the sense of security. But at least there were consequences. At least it wasn't just another situation where someone violated my privacy and then continued their life without any repercussions. I kept my OnlyFans account after the legal victory. I realized that I wasn't going to stop creating content just because people kept trying to violate my privacy and access my accounts. I realized that I had the right to do this work, and that legal recourse was actually available, even if it was a long and exhausting process. That story ends right there. And what the legal victory demonstrated was that privacy violations can sometimes have consequences if you're willing to pursue them. It demonstrated that the legal system can protect you if you have evidence and if you're willing to fight. But it also demonstrated how much time and energy and resources it took to actually achieve that outcome. For most people, that's just too much to deal with. Story 15. The shift in perspective. 6 minutes. Our next story comes from someone who had their perspective on privacy violations change over time. I was one of the people who discovered a neighbor's OnlyFans account. I'm not proud of it now, but at the time I thought I was justified. I thought I was concerned about the building community. I thought I was protecting people's interests. I discovered the account completely by accident. I saw something online that looked like my neighbor, and I did what seemed like a reasonable investigation to confirm whether it was actually them. Once I'd confirmed it, I felt like I needed to do something about it. I felt like it was my responsibility to inform other people who lived in the building. Looking back now, years later, I realized that I was wrong. I realized that I violated my neighbor's privacy. I realized that I inserted myself into a situation that had nothing to do with me and was no threat to anyone. What changed my mind was that something similar happened to me. Someone discovered something about me online. Someone who I thought I could trust used that information against me. Someone invaded my privacy in a way that made me feel violated and exposed and unsafe. It was only after I'd experienced what it felt like to have someone violate your privacy that I understood what I'd done to my neighbor. It was only after I'd felt that violation that I could see my own behavior clearly for what it was. A power move, an invasion, a boundary violation. I reached out to my neighbor. I apologized. I explained what I'd done and why I'd done it and why I realized now that it was wrong. My neighbor was gracious about it. They accepted my apology. But like in another story I've told, the apology didn't undo the damage. My neighbor had already moved out of the building, partially because of what I'd done. But at least I learned something. At least I changed. At least I recognize now that other people's privacy and other people's choices are not my responsibility to monitor or control or judge. That story ends right there. And what this person's shift in perspective demonstrates is that people often don't understand the impact of their actions until they've experienced something similar themselves. People often need to feel the violation in order to understand that they've committed one, and that's not an excuse. But it's a reality about how privacy violations occur and how they're perpetuated. Story 16. The acceptance. Our final story comes from someone who reached a point of acceptance about their situation. I've had an OnlyFans account for about 5 years. In that time, I've experienced almost every kind of privacy violation I've described in these stories. Neighbors discovering my account, coworkers discovering my account, family members discovering my account, strangers attempting extortion, people redistributing my content, people trying to access my account through hacking, people reporting me to my employer, people organizing campaigns against me, people leaving my content printed on my car. At a certain point, I stopped trying to prevent the privacy violations from happening. I stopped trying to hide. I stopped trying to maintain a separation between my OnlyFans identity and my real identity. I realized that I couldn't actually control whether people found out about my account. I realized that I could be as careful and as cautious as I wanted to be, and people who wanted to find out would find out. I realized that the energy I was spending trying to prevent discovery was energy I could spend doing literally anything else. So I made a different choice. I decided to be more intentional about what I shared and with whom. I decided to accept that the privacy violation was inevitable and that I wasn't going to spend my life trying to prevent the inevitable. I started being more upfront about the work I did. I told people who needed to know. I was honest about my job. I stopped treating it like a secret that needed to be protected. And something interesting happened when I stopped being secretive about it. It stopped being a scandal. It stopped being something that people could use as leverage against me. Once it was just something I did for work, once it was just part of my life that I wasn't hiding, the power that people had to harm me using that information diminished significantly. I still get people trying to invade my privacy. I still get people finding my account and using it against me in various ways. But it doesn't have the same power it used to have because I've accepted that this is part of my life and I'm not going to apologize for it or hide it. That story ends right there. And what this person's acceptance demonstrates is that sometimes the way forward isn't to try to protect your privacy harder or to hide more effectively. Sometimes the way forward is to accept that your privacy is going to be invaded in certain ways and to decide that you're not going to let that dictate how you live your life. It's not a perfect solution. It doesn't prevent the violations, but it does reduce their power. Outro. 90 seconds. Thank you for staying with me for these stories about privacy, boundaries, and the way that people's personal choices get subject to judgment and invasion by everyone around them. What these stories demonstrate is that once you put anything on the internet, once you create any kind of online presence, you lose a certain amount of control over your privacy and your image. People will find what they're looking for if they're motivated enough. People will use information they have against you if they decide that's what they need to do. People will judge you and invade your privacy and organize against you based on their own standards and their own beliefs about what's appropriate. But these stories also demonstrate that privacy is something worth protecting. Boundaries are something worth maintaining. The right to have a life that's separate from your professional identity. The right to have personal choices that aren't subject to community judgment. The right to have control over your own image and your own body. These are things that matter. I hope these stories help you understand how easily privacy violations can occur and how common they really are. I hope they help you recognize when you might be approaching a privacy invasion, even if you think your intention is pure. And I hope they help you extend privacy and respect to people whose choices you might not agree with, but who still deserve the right to make those choices. Get some rest tonight. You've listened to a lot of stories. Close your eyes. Let your mind settle. And remember that the boundaries you set for yourself, the privacy you protect, the choices you make about your own life, those are all worth protecting and worth defending. Thanks for listening.